Alright my friends, so in the previous video we spoke about HTML, hypertext markup language. We learned that it's a structural language. We structure our content within some of those divs and sections and asides and paragraphs and stuff. And we also mentioned CSS, and we said, CSS will eventually give some life, some positioning, some layout to our HTML. In today's video, named Intro to CSS or CSS Intro, we're gonna be learning about CSS, but as always, there's some theory and some concepts that I really need you to understand, so let's discuss that a little bit. So CSS is one of the most fundamental, if not the most fundamental, part of this trinity, as I call it, the CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. Each one of the three has its own use, and they're equally important, so there isn't it's oftentimes you might say, hey, I can't wait to get to JavaScript because that is the real programming. There's no real programming, right? That is like you would have a car without an engine, or it's like having an engine without the rest of the car, right? So there isn't such thing as this is less or this is more important. Without CSS, the web pages, every single web page that you went to in your life wouldn't exist, because they would have no user experience, no user interface. They would nothing would make sense. So the reason why I'm trying to put so much emphasis on this is because CSS, unfortunately, amongst even some senior developers, even among some top-notch developers, is usually something that is treated as something that's not important. That's why you're often gonna even hear how CSS sucks, how it's hard, how it's easy, how it doesn't matter. But fundamentally, if you want to follow this bootcamp that's obviously made by me, I want you to internalize right now and forever, for the rest of your career, at least in this part of the industry, that CSS is the most core and most fundamental technology. Because without it, again, you can write the most perfect code. In JavaScript, you can write some structural HTML as precise as you want, but without the looks and without experience, it would be all for nothing. So how would I characterize CSS? CSS for me can be really separated into two categories: layout and styling. Layout is what's usually considered a little bit difficult in CSS. What is layout? Well, layout is putting things on the page where you want them. So for example, hey, I want this navigation bar to look like this, to be positioned here. I want these three boxes next to each other with some margin and padding and border and outline, etc. I want this box here, I want this box there. And then, when users maybe, on this resolution, I want these boxes to be 2 horizontally instead of 3 or 1. I want things to be vertical or horizontal. So this is called responsiveness, and it refers to, building web pages which scale with your browser, with your resolution, with your screen density, etc., etc. So the hardest part of CSS is, in fact, positioning things. So this is going to be the biggest challenge for you as well. No matter now as a beginner or as a senior, it's always going to be like, okay, how can I build this layout? So, there's this infinite scroll here. As I scroll the page, I don't want this element to move. I want it to, be fixed or sticky, whatever. So keep in mind that most of the time that you're going to spend with CSS is going to be trying to put things where they should be, and then making sure that these things look good on smaller or larger resolutions. Like, how does this website look on a TV, right? How does it look like on a tablet? How does it look like on a mobile phone? Do we even support mobile phone, right? So it's really all going to be about layout. The second category, a little bit easier one, is about styling. Hey, I want to text this paragraph, this text red. I want to add a shadow to this box. I want to animate or transition this element. So the second part of CSS is a little bit easier for the most part, because there isn't really much philosophy or technicalities there. I want to make this text red. You say color red, right? So this part, so that's how we're gonna separate them, and we're gonna spend a lot of time initially into layout and making sure we understand how we can position things, and then we're gonna prettify them, put some makeup, some lipstick on top of it so things look fine, right? So CSS fundamentally is really all about this: layout, where things are, how they scale with different resolutions and browsers, and then colors, shadows, bolds, italics, etc., etc., right? So with that said, again, the core lesson that I want you to take from this part of the video now is that CSS is absolutely fundamental. You can now make a choice starting now. you can choose to be a developer that's going to spend sufficient amount of time genuinely trying to learn CSS and HTML, because already in 2-3 weeks from now, if you follow this program, you'll be able to already build full-fledged, full-featured website with all of the things, nice colors, fonts, and stuff. That means that basically 2/3 you already covered. So you'll already be able to build something literally tangible that you can almost sell. So only segment that's gonna be missing is the JavaScript. So eventually when we get to, throughout this program, what I want us to do is I wanna make sure that when we get to JavaScript part, that we have covered really and that we understand HTML and CSS. So in simple words, can you make a beautiful site that looks good, that has nice margins, padding, fonts, and stuff? So we're going to be focusing in this part of the course on that. Then once we get to the JavaScript part, if you get there, that means that you have already covered enough of CSS and HTML. Okay, with that said, let's now switch to my slides. I'm just going to show you what we're going to be doing, and then we're going to start writing some CSS and some HTML. All right, let's now switch to my slides. One sec. So now when we know a little bit about importance of CSS and about the stuff that I just shared with you, let's take a look just quickly at the slides, what we're going to be doing first, some of the first things in CSS. This is not the whole comprehensive list of what we're going to be doing, but these are the things that I find the most fundamental in CSS. So let's go. So first, what is CSS? This is just a Wikipedia definition. It's a cascading style sheets. We're going to discuss as we go throughout this course what cascading refers to and why is it called cascading. It's a style sheet language used for specifying the presentation and styling of a document written in a markup language such as HTML or XML. So as you can see, even the official definition says, hey, I exist so you can style HTML or XML documents. XML is a format similar to HTML. It's also a structured document, but it's very rare today on the web that XML is used. It has been used very long ago. CSS is a cornerstone technology of the World Wide Web alongside HTML and JavaScript. So you can see these three guys are fundamentally nothing without each other. So don't let yourself be brainwashed or led into believing how CSS and HTML is something you can just jump over because JavaScript is a real programming. Don't be that person. Again, if you can't make things look nice and feel nice, your product is irrelevant. So from the consumer perspective, when you go to a website of some kind, what it is that actually matters for you? Well, what matters really is how good user interface is, how quickly can you navigate from point A to B. So essentially, you're not thinking about underlying technology, like, oh, is this JavaScript or is this Golang, right? No, you're thinking about as a user, no matter even as a programmer who is a user, when you play a video game, you're not thinking about, oh, wow, this game is running so fast, it must be C++. No, you're thinking about, wow, this quest is so fun. So never neglect the importance of CSS. It is the fundamental part of this stack that you actually chose to learn. So yeah, CSS is the heart of web development. Do not neglect it. You will suffer. Without CSS, UI and UX wouldn't exist. Those two categories of CSS that I discussed with you. First one is layout, putting boxes next to each other, adding space between boxes, making boxes scale on different screen sizes, and in simple words, it's putting things on the screen where we want them. Second part, the rest, that I named the category the rest. Colors, shadows, gradient, text, typography, paragraphs, headings, spans, anchor tag, etc. Transitions and animations. When I hover over this button, make a cooler hover effect. When I click on this thing that slides into the page, make it animate, right? Make the website feel a little bit alive, right? Simple words, making things looks and feel nice. What are we going to start CSS part with? We're going to start obviously with the selectors, but we're going to start with a concept such as CSS box model, display property, position, media queries, basically making sure that things can be scaled on the screen, and box sizing property, which you're going to see very soon what it does. This is the last slide, so let's just spend maybe a minute or two on this because I find it incredibly fundamental. When I worked at Thinkful at the Bootcamp, and I worked there for more than 5 years, one pattern that I've seen with actually every single student is that when you come into the world of web, right, your design skills are marginal or non-existent. It means basically that you will most likely suck big time, not because you have no talent or because your design skills are bad. quite opposite. It's because you just haven't seen the trends. You don't know what the trends are. So what does that mean? That means that what we're going to be doing, I'm going to teach you how to learn. And what most designers on this planet do, best top-notch designers that work, at Google, or designers that are interns at some two-man startups, every single person gets inspired. So instead of reinventing the wheel, you now coming up after 30 years of web, you are now reinventing the design. We're going to go to some free web templates, websites, and then we're going to analytically figure out how do websites look today. Like if you look at the websites 20 years ago, each one of them almost looked identical. So what does that mean? Well, it means that web, as it evolves, it kind of mimics websites, or products mimic each other. So what we're gonna do when I start giving you some assignments, we're gonna say, okay, actually, because I don't have the skills, I'm not a designer, I've never done this before. No worries. We're gonna go to, I literally just Googled this random websites, template.mo.com. There you can go and find like thousands of different CSS templates. And what we're going to be doing, we're just going to look at every single one of them. We're going to take 50 different websites and say what it is that we can learn from this. Okay, well, each one of them have big headings. Each one of them has cool fonts. Each one of them. So instead of you now trying to become a designer starting 30 years back, that would be a huge waste of time. You're going to learn to mimic. All right, so now I gave you 10 minutes of theory. Please, as always, this is equally important, if not even more, than now actually writing CSS. Internalize this. We're gonna cover now all of these things. So let's actually switch now to our VS Code and let's start coding. All right, let's go. All right, now when you guys know how crucial the CSS is and that it's really the backbone of every user interface and user experience in the web, I have to emphasize again, please take these lessons as something very important, because very soon you can already have two incredibly important skills, HTML and CSS, and you would be able to, if you learn this properly, to almost design any website that you can imagine. And then once we get to the JavaScript part, you would have so much confidence, you would feel so good, because you would have covered the CSS, the HTML, and be able to focus on JavaScript. Take this advice really seriously, because when we get to the JavaScript part, you want to make sure that you don't have to fight the other two aspects of it, because you're gonna get very easily overwhelmed. All right, great. So that's, hopefully I got my message across. Now, before we start writing CSS, there are a few things that I want you to do. First and foremost, I want you to go to github.com and sign up on that platform. It's github.com, if you don't already know, is the biggest platform for developers, where we keep our code safe and where we keep our notes and stuff. The reason why I want you to sign up there is because I have created a public and free resource for this bootcamp, and I'm going to be putting all of the notes and exercises and code in there. So as we progress with this code base, with this bootcamp, you will always be able to follow the materials in there. I'm going to be sharing some links. As you can see, I've already created exercises for the CSS part, so you will need you will probably want to have this resource. Besides that resource, I have included additional resources that I would advise you to use. So for example, one of them is devdocs.io. If we go to devdocs.io here, this website really aggregates a lot of other platforms, documentation from other platforms. So for example, now we're doing CSS. You could click on CSS and you could click on selectors. We're going to be, actually in this lesson, I'm going to be talking about selectors. So here you'll be able to really check and confirm everything that I'm saying. So use this platform to your advantage. It's amazing. All right, so now before we start writing CSS, let's go to our VS Code now when you know these things. Before I actually proceed, once you open this resource, once you sign up, if you click on introduction here, you'll be able to preview these things in a very nice way. So you can see here in the left, you're going to have all of the documents that I wrote for different lessons, and then you're going to be able to read the code and see everything. And then as you click here, you're going to be seeing that the content here in the right changes. As you can see, all the links are marked with a blue color like this, so make sure you click them. And make sure, to use this in conjunction with what I'm explaining. So see the CSS box model, document flow. So you can see whenever you see some of these links, make sure to follow them and check them out, right? It's very important. Okay, So let's go now to my VS Code, and before we actually proceed, you can see that I've set up some stuff already. So which project are you going to be using is irrelevant. You can use the previous project empty, that folder that we created. So it's up to you where you're going to be writing. You can create a new folder for the CSS part. It's up to you. One thing that you can really do is you can also download this repository and write code in there, because as you can see, for me, I have actually opened this web developer bootcamp resource in my VS Code, and I can already see all of these things. So if you want to do that, you can go here, you can click on code, and you can then click on download zip. So you would download this zip file, you would open this zip file. Let me just close this browser thing. You would open this and you would extract this to your desktop, for example, and then you can open it in your VS Code. You can even just, if you don't feel like it, you can just drag this thing inside of your VS Code, and that's you can just click open folder, right? If you have done that, there's one more thing that I want you to do before we start writing CSS, and that is, if you remember in one of the previous lessons, I told you that over time we're going to extend our Visual Studio Code experience with the different extensions, and now is the time to do that. What I want you to do is basically to install an extension where as we write our HTML and CSS, we can see the live preview in Visual Studio Code. To do that, you can either press Ctrl Shift and P or Command Shift and P on Mac, or you can go to View, Common Palette, and say Install Extensions. And here in this extension search, you can search for live, and then find something called Live Preview. If I actually search for live preview, you will find this extension written by Microsoft. It has almost 4 million downloads. I'm actually going to uninstall mine because I have it installed already. So you're going to click install. That's going to be great. You will close this. You will go to your file explorer, and now you can right click on this and go show preview. You can also, if you don't like clicking, if you want to start memorizing shortcuts already, you can press Ctrl Shift P or Command Shift P and also type show preview. I believe it should be able to do that. As you can see, live preview, internal browser. So you can click this and it's going to do the same thing. Now, as you can see, if I start typing here, we can see the live text. If I type H1, you can see it live, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to start with the CSS selectors. So I'm going to show you how you actually select elements, but before we do that, we're going to talk about where do we actually write CSS, and there are basically three places where we can write it. There's internal styles, external styles, and inline styles. All right, bear with me. I'm going to pause this and then continue with these subjects. All right, see you in a second. All right, so there's three ways in which you can write CSS. As I said, there's internal styles, external styles, and inline styles. You can actually press Ctrl P or navigate here to the files if you have opened the previous folder that we discussed in your VS Code, and you can actually click here on an introduction, and inside of the introduction you can scroll a little bit down and you will notice here that I've included these things. So we can use inline styles, internal or embedded styles, and external styles. If it's easier for you to read this, you can open this document, this .md, which stands for Markdown, and you can press this icon here that previews the Markdown. So now you can read it a little bit easier. I advise you again to read all of this, even though we discussed it in the video. And then here you will notice that these things are explained. So let's explain this in a video format as well. So in order to start writing CSS, right, we need to know where to write it. So I'm gonna go and preview this again. So how can I style this heading 1? How can I say, hey, heading 1, I want you to be color red? So first we can do that using those internal styles. And I can do that by saying style, open and closing tags, if you remember. And here I can say H1. I'm basically selecting now some heading in an HTML document, and I can use those parentheses. So every single time when we use CSS selectors, we open them and close them with these parentheses, and then we type the CSS properties. So here I can say color, red. This is literally now, you already know now how to select an element and what is the structure of writing these roles. Like, hey, I want to find some heading 1 somewhere in this specific HTML document, and I want to apply color red to it. I want to change the font size of this, and I want to make it pretty big. I'm going to say 4 RAM. I'm explicitly using these values now, so because we're going to be talking about them in the future. So don't worry about these things at this moment. So you can see here, now I have selected H1 inside of my body. I literally told my my browser, hey browser, find all the H1s on this page and apply these styles to it. If I have another H1, it's going to be the same. It's going to have the same styles. Same styles will be applied because I'm very unspecific. I'm saying again, select all H1s and apply these rules, right? So this is basically now one of the ways to include CSS, right? So let's not get in fully into selectors yet because we can do that in a moment. So right now I'm trying to teach you how we can write CSS. We could write these same rules using the inline styles, and those are this way of writing CSS is not recommended, and I urge you to never do this. What I can also do, I can say style here. I can use an HTML attribute called style, and I can say color blue, font size pink, or let's say color blue. That makes no sense what I said. Let's say 2 rem. You can see here now I have styled this thing using an inline style, and as you can see, the order, the precedence, the importance level is always on the inline, so nothing can override the inline style. Why? Well, because it's very logical. HTML documents are rendered from top to bottom. They're interpreted, right? So at one point the browser is going to say, hey, I want the H1 to be red, but then it's going to stumble upon here and it's going to realize that we're overriding that. We're saying no, the style, the color should be blue and font size should be 2 rem. So as you can see, we are now overriding this rule that we have inside of the internal style. Now the core issue with inline styles isn't just the precedence or the order or the importance of how styles are applied, is that we are now mixing the structure of our HTML with the design. We're basically breaking something in software engineering that we call separation of concerns, because we want to make sure that we have something that styles things, and we want to make sure that we have something that structures things or hold things. So in this context now, our HTML is not only responsible for content, but it's also responsible for styling, and we don't want that. So this way of writing CSS, never do this. There's some exceptions, especially when we get to JavaScript part, but that's going to be very different. And now the last and the most common way, and the way that we will be writing CSS in this entire course, are external style sheets, the files. So basically here I'm going to come and say style.css. You can name this file however you want. You can name it banana.css as long as it ends with CSS extension. Now I can go here and I can remove this style. I'm actually going to cut this. I'm going to copy it so I can paste it there. And here I'm going to say link. And you can see here we have this link HTML tag that has this style sheet attribute. It's saying, hey, I'm trying to link a style sheet, and href is the location of where the file is. Our file is right next to HTML file, this HTML file that I'm writing, and it's called style CSS. If I paste this thing back, you can see now that, hey, wow, this is actually great. Now we have separated our HTML document and we've put our CSS file in its own file, in its own document, right? Now you're probably wondering, hey Alex, what the hell is /? So when it comes to programming, there are two ways we can import files. There's the absolute paths and relative paths. We're not going to discuss this now. You're going to get very much confused, but keep in mind that when you see this /, that means the file, look for the file relative to where I am, meaning index.html. So the file is start from where I am and then search for it in that same place, right? So you can see when I say /style CSS, we mean, so if this style CSS was in a folder called Apple, if I put this inside of the Apple folder, then you can imagine this is going to be /apple/style CSS, right? So I'm saying start looking relative to me where I am as an HTML file, and then seek for things. So you can see I'm saying relative to me, and then go to the Apple folder, and then in there go for the style CSS, right? So now we know that. So this is basically now 3 ways in which you can include CSS for the rest of this course, for the rest of this whole bootcamp. Even when we get to React.js and some of the more complicated examples, these things will always going to be in a separate file, so you don't have to worry too much about this because we will not be writing internal CSS at all anymore. Okay, that's great. So now actually, when we know how to include CSS, let's proceed with CSS selectors. Basically the thing that I already started talking about here, but I had to end with the actual ways how to include the files. Okay, let's see each other in a moment. All right, so CSS selectors are the fundamental and the most important part right now because, well, we need to first and foremost learn how can we tell our HTML, hey H1, I want to style you, right? So CSS selectors are practically just a way to get a reference, a handle, a phone number of some element and say, hey, you know, I know where you are. So we need to be able to point to some element inside of the HTML document and say, hey, you are the thing that I want to style. So of course that's the most fundamental. That's why that's the first lesson, is because, well, clearly, right, we need to select the element somehow, right? And there are several ways to do that. There's a little section in this thing that I shared with you called selectors, and I really urge you to, after I'm finished with this, to take a look at that, right? So, and there's an explanation what selectors are and blah blah blah, right? So in the previous thing that we discussed like a minute ago, right, we already made these things red, and as I told you, this is basically very unspecific selector. We're saying, hey, find all the heading ones on the page and apply these styles to them, right? So that's not very useful because, right, on your web page you're gonna have many different headings, you're gonna have many different paragraphs, right? So it's almost, I don't think in a modern web, in a real web apps, when we get there, you will never do this because this is crazy. This is not very practical. You will want to be specific with your components. You know, your headings are going to look different in certain places. So this is not going to be something that you're going to be commonly using, right? So now let's imagine that we had a section, for example, right? Imagine we had a section. In that section we had a H1 and we had some paragraph, right? So let's imagine this was our article. Let's imagine this is an article thing here, right? As you can see now, this H1 is still applying the styles to everything, right? So even this guy is affected, right? So if we were not this unspecific, this wouldn't have happened, right? So if I only wanted to apply this red style to my article, I can now say as well, section and H1. Now I'm saying, hey, only apply these styles to the headings which are inside of the section. This is also kind of very unspecific, right? Because, you know, there can be many different sections for different purposes and they could have different headings, right? So even this is too unspecific, right? So how can we kind of get more into specific things, right? Well, we could label our HTML elements with something and then react to these labels. And there are two ways really to do this. We can use ID attribute or a class attribute. Let's start with the class attribute, right? So the class attribute is just an HTML attribute. You say class, and here you say, let's say, blog post. So basically, I'm labeling this section here to say to be a blog post, right? So now I can be kind of more specific in my intent. I can say here, instead of this, I can say dot blog dash post. What is this dot? Well, don't get stressed by it. Dot is just a syntax. It's just a grammar of CSS. Whenever you have a class in HTML, that's translated in CSS file. You say dot blog post. This means, hey CSS, I want you to apply heading 1, these styles to heading 1 inside of this class, this element that has this class. As you can see, section has a class to blog post. So now, if I create another section that doesn't have that class, right? Well, these styles are not going to be applied. So this is that section now. Let's remove these two, right? But you can see here now that I almost created this little component, this something that I can reuse. I'm just saying, hey, I want to only style heading 1 like this into blog post. I can also say here, I don't know, margin bottom 0. So this text that we saw is not pushed. I can also do the same with a paragraph. I can say blog post P. And I can say, you know, color gray, font style italic, right? So you can see now we did this. So you get the point right now. But what now happens if I wanted if I had some paragraph inside of this blog post that I didn't want to style like this. Let's imagine that inside of this section I had another div, and inside of that div I had another paragraph that had some stuff, right? What if I didn't want to style this? Well, then you can be even more specific. So you get the point. So you can label any of the elements as you want. I can now come here and I say class is equal to, let's say, blog post, I don't know, summary, right? Now I can come here and I can say blog post summary color blue, right? Now let's make sure that we don't have a typo there as well. So let's make sure, yeah. Let's make sure that this is good. So great, this is a very good example. So let's discuss this now, right? So you can see now that something has happened, something that's related to specificity. So look at this now. So here I'm saying find any paragraphs inside of the blog post and then apply color gray. So you can see here, this is a paragraph inside of a blog post. This is a paragraph inside of a blog post, right? So you can see this is a little bit problematic now because we're having a issue now overriding the styles. We're having a conflicting styles. This blog post summary wants the color to be blue, but this selector has already styled them, right? Like if you would do, for example, something like this, right? Nothing would have happened because our paragraph was already styled, right? So, so if we go back here, there's several ways we can solve this. We can say, well, I want this paragraph inside of a div, inside of a section to be of that color. So here, if I'm a little bit more specific, I could say something like this, or even more specific, something like this. So now I'm saying I want to color blog post summary that's inside of a div, that's inside of a blog post to color blue, right? So you can see what has happened here. Since I wasn't specific, specificity has practically won. If I just say blog post summary, I'm being neglected. If I say blog post summary, now something's happening. But it's always better to be even more specific. So here now I'm saying blog post summary div. So you can read this almost like Arabic from right to left. Find an element that has this class inside of a div, which is inside of a blog post. So if you can come here, right? Here's my paragraph, which is inside of a div, and this div is inside of a section blog post, right? So this is one of the ways to select things. We can also select things in other ways. We could have also said, hey, and we're gonna see that in this document now, right? If we go to selectors, and we just close this very quickly. So if we go to selectors and we come here, so you can see, and I'm gonna explain the ID as well in a second. So you can see the type selector we already covered. So type selector is the simplest one when we're the most unspecific. So select all elements of a specified type. So let's style all paragraphs on the page, all heading ones on the page. In generally, you will not use this much because that's for the most part useless in reality. Then we discussed class selector. That's what I just showed you. A class always has a dot followed by a name and then these parentheses, right? And then inside of there we write CSS properties. Properties, basically, what is a property? Well, if you're a human being, you have a blonde hair, you have blue eyes, that's a property, right? So in the context of CSS, we define CSS properties. We're saying we want this element to have this color, we want this element to have this font weight, etc., etc. Then the ID selector. So if we go to the ID selector very quickly, there's not much to say, and this is going to be a selector that you're not going to be using almost ever. ID basically stands for unique identifier, so we cannot reuse the selector of a type ID. So for example, let me show you what I mean. So if we still stick a little bit to a class, right? Let's remove all of this. So classes in CSS are used to be reusable. So let's imagine that we had something like, let's imagine that we have HTML5 semantic tags literally has an HTML tag called article. So, but it doesn't matter, not to confuse you. Let's go with a div. Let's imagine that we wanted to present. Let's go to TechCrunch, Now let's grab two articles. So let's open this one and this one, right? So I'm gonna just to demonstrate this, let me make sure that I keep opening my OBS. Okay, so I'm gonna say here H1. I'm gonna paste this. VCs are optimistic about something. Great, good for them. I will open up a paragraph here, and then I'm gonna copy the other one. Korean micromobility star blah blah blah. Okay, so let's come here, say div H1, just so we have some real content, and I'm just gonna grab, I don't know, these two paragraphs, right? That's great. Okay, so if I go down here and I say paragraph, and then we go open our preview here, so right click show preview, we can see that we have some of these two articles, right? So what if we wanted to style these two articles? What if we wanted to create a reusable style, so we can, you know, each one of these articles, just like on TechCrunch, right? They have the different content, but you can see they're styled all of the same, right? Here they have a category, but they have the same, so you can treat these as components, and these components always look the same, but they have different styles. So let's actually also just try to mimic what they have there. So here I'm gonna say, I don't know, span, I'm gonna say transportation, and here I'm gonna say transportation as well, right? So what does that mean when we say they always look the same, but they have different content? That means that they have classes which are reusable. So let's do that in our case here. So let's go to our style sheet, and yeah, let's give those divs a class name of article, right? Or something like that, blog post, like, so let's say tech article, right? Something like this. And we can also give more classes here. I'm gonna say tech article category, and here I'm gonna say H1 tech article title, and I'm gonna come here and say class tech article description, right? Or content or something, right? You get the point, right? And then I'm gonna just copy paste these things to the other place as well, because we have two of them, right? So here I'm gonna paste the category, then I'm gonna paste the heading 1, and then lastly I'm gonna paste the description, right? So I just want to have these classes. I want to be very specific in my CSS, right? And now I can go here and lay them all down. So I can say tech article category, tech, and I keep writing text instead of tech, and I'm gonna say tech article title. I wrote a dot, right? What else did we have? We had title, category, and description, right? Beautiful. Let's come here, and I say description, right? So now we want to design pretty much something that looks like this. Let's zoom in a lot so we can kind of, let's see if we can zoom in so much that we can, yeah, so we want to design something like this. So let's do that together, right? So what we want to do here now is, and basically here I'm trying to showcase you how we use classes as reusable units, right? So let's show preview. So we have this now. Let's start styling it, right? So if we go back here, what I will want to do, I'm going to go to the title, and I'm going to say margin bottom 0, because I happen to know that, yeah, titles in HTML by default have some, let's see, do they have anything like this? No. So this is good, right? Now I want to style this transportation to be green. So I'm going to just go to the category, and I'm going to say color, I don't know, green, yellow. There we go. You can see it, not very visible, but we can see it's there. Let's go back here. What else do they have? Is there something that we can steal? Doesn't matter. Maybe we can make this description gray. So we're going to say color gray. And as you can see, tech article description, I think that I messed it up. Here we wrote text instead of tech. So let's make sure that we named our classes properly. So you can see now we basically made these classes which are reusable, right? We can reuse these styles now across multiple elements at any place where we want. So you can see now we have created these classes, and we can apply them to multiple elements. So class attribute in HTML and CSS is meant to be reusable. It's meant to be applied to many things that represent, in most cases, the same components. So you can see in this context, right, we have some sort of a TechCrunch article, right? let's actually go ahead and do a little bit more styling. So we can say here font size, let's say 16 pixels. Let's reduce the size a lot. Let's change the font family. Let's say font family. And as you can see, VS Code gives me a lot of options here. So let's see what I want to say. I want to say, I don't know, this thing. And I want to say letter spacing, I don't know, 10 pixels. You know, just for fun. We're just breaking things down. So as you can see now, what is the point of this? Well, the point is that the class is a reusable unit. So you will be reusing these styles. Think of this as anything that you can reuse, really. Imagine that, yeah, you have something in a real life that you can just, like a bottle. Bottle would be a great example of you can refill the bottle, right? So you can reuse it, right? It's something reusable. So in this context, these classes, when used, they will always apply the same styles. And that leads us to the ID. So the ID attribute is not reusable. If we create an element here, if I clean all of this up, and if I create an element that has an attribute of ID, so I say here h1, and I say ID is I am unique, and we write some text in here. Now you will notice that, well, you will not actually notice much other than the fact that the IDs are not reusable, meaning you would ever only use the ID if you know that there's never going to be that element of that ID ever again on the page, right? And generally today in modern web development, using IDs is kind of deprecated. It's not suggested. But I still want to kind of show you that it exists. You can see the only difference, right, is that classes are written by a dot and IDs are written by this hash sign. It's like on your phone number in the bottom right corner, right? So that's what the ID is. You would generally set something to ID if it's unique. Okay, great. So we have covered few of them. There's few more that I would like to mention. You can see here I've wrote unique element. There's the sentence selector. I already showed you this. Basically, this is when you're selecting elements which are elements of some parents. So, hey, I want to style a paragraph that's inside of a div. You have an example here. I want to make all of the paragraphs which are inside of any divs of color green. And then we have a child selector, which this child selector is a very interesting one. As you can see here, this is the example, but the example I feel isn't really good, so let me show you what it is. So basically, keep in mind the emphasis here is that select all elements that are the direct children of specified element. So this is where the emphasis is. Let me show you. So if we go to the UL here and we create, let's say, 4 list items, if I come in here, let me show you the difference, right? So if I come here and say li, if I say ULLI, right, and I say color red, this is great, right? If I create a div inside of the UL, if I do this, or if I create another UL, another unordered list inside of that list, so you can see it's here, right? So you can see what's happening here now. We are styling all of the list items inside of the UL to red. But if we change this slightly a bit, right? So if we slightly change this, and we cannot use the UL here, we need to use a different element because the example I'm trying to build for you doesn't work. But if I use the div in here, right? Or any other element, you'll see that this list item is not going to be colored red. Because we're saying I only want to style list items of color red that are direct children of the UL, meaning only that are directly part of the UL. This is not directly part of the UL because this li is the child of div and div is child of the UL. So if you ever had use cases where you only wanted to say I only want to style, let's say, list items which are direct child of the UL, you would do this. You can see that this div, for example, isn't really this list items is not getting the color red as part of it, right? So this is one of the interesting selectors as well. Then we have a few others, right? We have this adjacent sibling selector, and this one basically, I would say that they go less in importance as we move down. This basically, as you can see, selects an element that is directly after another specified element. So basically, if we grab this example in here, if we go to our HTML file, if we just go to the body, and then we grab this example, you'll notice basically based on our structure, we're saying style the element, style the paragraph that's right after the div paragraph, right? So you can see here, selects an element that is directly after another specified element. So you can see basically the whole point of these selectors, and this is incredibly important to understand, is that web browser is giving you many different ways to select them. So that's why also this list to some degree is also wrong, because how you're going to select your elements primarily depends on how you're going to structure your HTML and how the structure is going to be. So this is going to really boil down deeply to your own understanding of this, right? Because some people might think this way. Some people might think, hey, I'm going to have this div, and then I'm going to have some element after each one of the divs. That my structure in the HTML is going to be as such, right? And some people might think that way. Some people might say, okay, and then I know, yeah, I can just use this, and I can, say, hey, style all of this. But in most cases, you will not be doing that. In 99.9% of the cases, you're going to be very specific instead. So instead of doing this, you're going to be using class names, because this creates this mental model where you have to really think really hard to figure out, okay, so I'm going to style all of the paragraphs which are after this element. But that is very dangerous, because what if you change? You can see what the problem of this example is, right? You're saying style all the direct paragraph that's directly after the div. But what if I just by accident would change this div to a section, right? So I come here and I say, actually, no, I didn't want to use a div. I wanted to use a section. Now your CSS no longer works, because now you have basically, as we use the term, coupled your styling to the structure of the HTML document, right? And that is very dangerous. So you will technically never write CSS like this. This makes no sense, because again, this is too unspecific. That's why these examples are here, to provide you what these things do. But in reality, you're not going to be writing CSS this way. Again, you're going to be mostly using the class names. Attribute selector, this is a very important one. Incredibly important one. We're not going to be working with inputs now, but as you can see, this is a great example, and we will actually I will showcase it to you. We haven't yet done forms and stuff. We're going to do that eventually. Right now we don't need that, but let's imagine that I have a form and a checkbox, and then here I can just write the CSS. I can copy the CSS into the file. So we have input, and then we have those strange kind of brackets. And then we have, obviously, so this is one of the other ways to select elements. So you can see here we're saying, hey, find the input by attribute. So this selector is finding the input by attribute. We could have also said here input just as well, and it would have done the same thing. The reason why we're not is because because you can have multiple different types of inputs on your page, and not all of them might be text that you're gonna see in future. They're gonna have different types. So here we're finding an element by some attribute, right? So I'm saying, hey, I want to style an input that has a type of text, right? You can see this one has a type checkbox, so this one is not going to be affected, right? But if we did this, for example, it might have affected something else, right? So the checkbox itself, right? So this is a very important one. And probably after the class name, this is the most important one we want to learn about now, and that is the pseudo class selector. Pseudo class selector basically is used to select certain elements by their state. So for example, this thing is active, it's focused, so you can say, hey, when the input is focused, I would like to apply something. So here we can say, input, and then you can say active, for example, background color red, right? As you can see, if I hold my mouse in there, that's the active state, it becomes red. I can also say, well, if you hover over the input, change its background to red. So you can see as soon as I hover, the background goes this. I can also say focused, right? When it's focused, when my cursor is focused, do that. And I can of course do anything else. I can say when it's focused, padding 10, right? So you can see when I focus it, it goes larger in size because of the padding, right? So that is what a pseudo selector is, and there's many of them. You can of course we'll learn about them as we build things. But the pseudo selector basically is heavily used. You've seen many times in your career where, you know, you've seen a link when you hover over a link. So for example, if we get over here, I can write a link, I can write an anchor tag that takes me to HTTPS, you know, programmer.network, you know, go to programmer network, right? And now if I hover over this, I want something to happen, right? So here I can now say anchor tag hover color, you know, purple, right? And as you can see, the color turn, let's maybe make it red so it's more visible. And then I can say, you know, font size 14 pixels, right? Or let's say 42 pixels, right? So now when I hover over it, when I move my mouse over it, it gets larger, right? And then if I click it, it goes somewhere, right? You can see it goes to programmer.network, right? So this is basically the lesson on selectors. We need to cover all of these things. So this is the selectors part now. I think we're gonna stop here, and then I'm gonna record a different video on the other things. So in the next one, we're gonna cover some of the other things, the box model and stuff. So this is, as I said so far, the most important part. So I really advise you to play with this, use the documents that I told you about, use this repository that I gave you, read these things. And then in the next video, we're going to continue with the box model, document flow, display property, etc., etc. And then eventually you're going to have to practice this using the exercises. And I would really, really advise you to do so. Thank you very much, guys, for watching. And I'll see you very soon in another video on CSS. Bye-bye. Have a good one. Cheers.